Hey everybody, Guinnessstache here. A lot of you probably remember me from the last AMA and from the community. This is our second community AMA with OriginTrail, and also Trace Labs is part of this one as well. Today we have Branimir, Žiga, Tomaž, and Jurij. And we're going to go through a list of questions that we got from the community, try to answer them the best we can in the amount of time we can. There's been a lot of time since the last AMAs happened throughout the world and throughout the project. So I think a lot of people are excited to get caught up with everything that's been going on with you guys. So welcome.
Try run. We will get it the first time, but
all right.
It's going to get better and better. So yeah, perhaps about the reasons why we're starting these open office hours with OriginTrail and the Trace Labs. The main reason being, of course, that we want to establish a more bi-directional communication. And for that reason, we also invited Guinnessstache to help us out with facilitating discussions between the community and the team here at Trace Labs. We believe that this will improve the information exchange. Plus, we might even give you some more desired information as to how the project, the OriginTrail project is evolving and what lies ahead. Of course, there are plenty of things that have happened and that they're also about to happen. As you were able to see last week, we have actually our partners announced that we have together launched several solutions. One of them even catering to several very, very big companies. I think a couple of them are even, or at least one of them is the largest company in the world, Walmart. And apart from the scan and other solutions launched together with BSI, of course, there are several novelties and things that are about to come and will be announced in the future. So without further ado, let's perhaps introduce ourselves, because I think there are there are tags now, Žiga, Jurij. Okay, all right. But nonetheless, I would start off with Jurij Škornik, because he's a kind of a newcomer to these AMAs / open office hours. Jurij has joined us already 2.5 years ago, somewhat. And he previously worked with DHL Consulting, which is actually wholly owned by the DHL company. And he worked there as a senior consultant, working very much in the same space as the Trace Labs operates today. And after that, he joined Trace Labs as a general manager, basically overseeing the proprietary part and also managing the all important activities also related to the development of OriginTrail. Why we have invited him? It's mainly because we have had the announcement, which is linked to BSI, and there are some other things which I believe that Jurij can also jump in, since once we have developed and launched the OriginTrail protocol, which is an open source protocol, it needs to be open source so that it is inclusive, that it caters to multiple companies that might even compete against themselves. And now, once the protocol development has passed a certain milestone, we are now also building proprietary solutions also as a Trace Labs. And since proprietary solutions sometimes are very important, so as to explain how far we are with the adoption, the reason why Jurij is here with us is quite obvious, because he can tap into that as well. Of course, we have Branimir, we have Tomaž, myself, and we have Anna somewhere in the background. She will help us navigate the technical part of this discussion. So thank you, Anna. Today, we're actually calling in from 4 locations from US, Serbia, Germany, Slovenia. So this is a purely decentralized open hour discussion. And I think we have several dozens of questions already, and Jason told us that there are additional questions coming in. So I believe Jason will be able to somehow navigate us through questions and perhaps merge a few questions that perhaps came in quite late, so that you'll get all the questions replied. So, yeah, anyone else? Let's jump into questions.
All right, awesome. So let's jump into it. So, all right. Are there any sectors not currently using the ODN that you think will be a great use case? And I know even on the OriginTrail site today, we've seen things from fashion, so obviously numerous aspects of supply chain. We've even seen finance. So is there any other places you would like to get the technology into that you think would be a fit that isn't currently, like maybe pharma or something along those lines?
It's a very, very relevant question to start off like that. As you know, OriginTrail, as the middleware protocol, is still quite a foundational piece of technology. And because of that, it's wide in its applicability. It was designed that way, especially like even if we go through the genesis of kind of how we started working within the food industry and learning about really how to connect different points in supply chain together, how to describe what happened in a supply chain with data, and how to find this unified language that all these different systems or all these different organizations could really talk. And here we stumbled upon things like GS1 EPCIS as one of the standards that we are utilizing, and OriginTrail has integrated today, is a way of how to describe how an event has happened in very generic terms. So when you start to think of it in that way, is these type of events really, it's the same if it happens in the food industry, in the fashion, or even in finance, right? The way that we showed it, because even when you move Bitcoins, it's still an event that happens where one Bitcoin goes to a certain wallet and then the rest kind of goes back to the wallet that it was sent to. So in that way, these principles are applicable across different sectors, different industries, different use cases. Not even kind of like, if you really want to talk wide, it's like it goes beyond the B2B world, right? So it can even utilize it within the consumer space, like we've seen with one of the use cases that BSI has included in the white paper. It's about your qualifications that could be kind of put on the ODN and given integrity. And then, of course, because the OriginTrail not being only about a kind of like a storage, like where you would dump data, it's about linked data. So how can we make meaningful connections between these data sets that are coming in not only from one side, but maybe also from multiple actors that are pertaining to a certain use case. So that's why we are, whenever kind of this question pops up in terms of what's your industry, kind of what are the industries that it can be applied to, it really depends. So it really depends on what type of business cases are there behind. As a general concept, I'd say that you can find something to do with ODN in any industry, just because of the way it's been designed and the way it handles data. But yeah, of course, in terms of what Trace Labs is working on and where we are engaged, we've described a couple of things that we're working on in the use cases section on the website. But there, of course, there's also others that we're kind of tapping into or in different phases of, let's say, development or looking into it, which will be always promptly communicated as soon as we will be able to do so.
Great. In general terms, how do you see adoption progressing over the next couple of years? And you know, once the great 2017 bear market kind of came into place, it really gave a lot of developers time to sit down and build. And I know over those 2 years, you guys all built a ton. But now it seems like it's go time, it's adoption time. So that being said, the next 2 years I think are going to be significantly different than the last 2 years, where now the stuff's built. So what does the next 2 years look like for you guys? Trace Labs, OriginTrail.
Yeah. So the adoption it's a keyword. It's been a keyword for us since the beginning of since we started developing the open source protocol, and actually even well before that. Back in 2013, when we started building a centralized solution, which gave us a lot of elements that we later on put into the OriginTrail development of OriginTrail protocol, like the open source data formats that we use, GS1. So all of those elements that we have put into the development of OriginTrail are actually a direct result of the adoption. And adoption, we see two very important kind of positive results stemming from the adoption itself. First one is the extended, basically, bloodline that we have as a team, as a company, as an open source ecosystem to continue developing OriginTrail and other solutions well into the future. And another equally important aspect is the validation of what we do. So every line of code, every basically marketing activity, everything that we basically do within TRAC Labs is basically a direct result of the adoption. And because of that result, we have extended bloodline, plus we have validated things that we have developed within the protocol itself, and also in some other proprietary elements that we're now putting on top of the TRAC Labs. Going into future, as Tomaž pointed out, there are several directions into which we are progressing and offering the OriginTrail protocol. Of course, OriginTrail protocol is underpinning all the solutions that are now out there. Some of them are also visible in the white paper posted by the BSI. Others can be, you can get to know more about other solutions via the website. And there is also a plethora of other solutions that we have not yet revealed. And all those solutions, of course, in 2 years' time, it's going to be quite obvious what we have in the making already today. When we were talking about the main dish and also the
entree,
the appetizers in the Telegram, I would say that right now we have not yet presented you the main dish. It's more like an appetizer. Whereas I believe we have not even mentioned what's the rest of the menu. So the main dish is yet to come. There are things that are about to be revealed somewhere in the future. Sometimes it's quite difficult to say when exactly. And as you have witnessed with the release of the BSI white paper, it's not always up to us as to when to press the red button. But this is how it is. When you make sure that there is adoption, you would mainly have clients or partners basically steering the wheels and being in charge of, when to release the information.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I think you got some hungry people out there. They're ready for the main dish. So I'll jump to the next question now. While you wet your whistle there for a second. Are you able to share any specific feedback from clients on how they found the experience using the ODN? And I know TRAC Labs, part of TRAC Labs' benefit especially is making the onboarding process easier for the clients. And so have you gotten feedback about how easy it is to use or how not easy it is to use? Or maybe NOS is how it's improved their process over what they were dealing with before?
Yeah, Jurij, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we have, like you mentioned, received a lot of feedback on the, say, the application and proprietary level, because that's primarily what the customers interact with. But of course, we also make sure, on the other hand, that the customers understand the underlying technology that is underpinning that, because that is essentially the value, right? That is essentially the value of or the largest part of the value of the entire solution that we bring to the table. So on one hand, we do make sure that the customers, they understand what the value is, they understand what ODN is bringing to the table. On the other hand, we don't, or they don't want to deal with things like cryptocurrency and distributed tech is still a bit of a, maybe not a taboo, but it's not a very also well covered in terms of skill set kind of topic in large corporations. So we try to abstract that as much as we can while delivering or displaying the value of the ODN. And so far that has been working quite well. So for us, it's important that the value is understood, that the technology is understood from a high level, meaning what it does, what it brings to the table. But then the focus is really on the actual applications and say business processes that will utilize these applications to deliver business value. If that answers the question, hopefully.
Yeah, no, perfectly. That's good to know. And it seems like you guys are making this less scary for companies to adopt, where they don't even know they're using what's behind it necessarily, but they know it works and they're benefiting from the technology. So that's awesome. Let's see. There are some big companies in the pipeline who are going to be using the TRAC token. Come on, guys, drop a serious bomb here. What's the next one?
Yeah. So as Žiga said, like it's not always in our hands to be the ones to kind of. We're always trying to present the value of communicating things as they are ripe to do so. I think it's something that we feel is very important because. And you know, it's not kind of how to say it. It's not about like just hyping something up for hype's sake. It's more about how to communicate value that technology brings. And when we see that the community of OriginTrail is really kind of excited to see it as we are, we see that as a very important thing because that's how also we see the kind of larger ecosystem in terms. A larger industry of crypto-based solutions even progressing. Truth be told, if with having this conversation 2 years ago and speaking about adoption and speaking about when can we have big names coming on, I would be more bullish in terms of kind of generally what the industry is going to be able to deliver within this time frame. Of course, we've seen the bear market, we've seen the some change of hearts in terms of how people want to pursue certain things or kind of trialing different directions, which is fine and understandable. But as a kind of validation of how public networks can be utilized in this in the context of enterprise clients is something that we're at the forefront of it, right? And we kind of, if again talking from 2 years ago until today, I'd say that I would be expecting that we'll have a larger group of companies coming to be able to come to this space where to this point where we have. But that being said, we're comfortable in taking that position as well to kind of drive this forward, just because we do see the tangible value getting created by this type of adoption within enterprise context with the big names that kind of you're alluding to. And if we do that, and if we as a community also are able to then communicate that, which is what we always try to explain to also the customers that we work with or the organizations that we're involved with, is because we genuinely believe that communication is a way of how you can also incite others to join in the creation of the value that you're trying to get. At the end of the day, it's all networks, right? So we have to have that type of connectivity, and the network effect is coming from not only from you in isolation doing something, but rather you taking these values which are delivered, integrity and trust and trustworthiness. Those are all kind of heavily value associated terms, and it only happens if you're able to kind of cross-pollinate that around your environment. So it won't happen in isolation. That's why communication is key, and we are doing kind of our part to be able to share more with the OriginTrail ecosystem as soon as we can, but of course always taking into account all the stakeholders that they need to be.
I mean, most likely the word about the next big company using OT is not going to come from us. It's going to come directly from its users, and it's going to come directly from the partners, the partnership network that is creating solutions right now. Again, the release, last week's release, could give you a glimpse of what has been happening in the background in the last year and a half since the launch of the OriginTrail protocol, and you can get a feeling of the greatness behind the curtain. And right now, the good thing is that we have exposed OriginTrail decentralized network to several dozens of really big companies. You were able to see the list of the companies that are coming into play with respect to one of the BSI solutions. And this is not it. It's that there are several other things that are already being built out, and there's a matter of time when things will be revealed, explained in white papers, not written by us directly. And this is something that we're all, are very much looking forward to. And in terms of how big these names are, sometimes I think at some point we will asymptotically go towards the zero of the difference between the greatness of the companies that we have already enlisted through one of the partners' solutions. And sometimes you just cannot go bigger than that, You already see that we have some pretty big players on our side.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's about, these trusted data exchanges needs to happen for the big guys as well, for the smaller companies. So you need to have that inclusivity, again, network effect, and kind of that's the way you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's there is a limited number of companies in the world. What we will be able to do in the future is to increase the exposure of the ODN towards the existing accounts, and this is something that can be done through technological advancements. It can be done through the upgrades of the OriginTrail technology. One of the upgrades, one of the examples of such upgrades is the data marketplace that we have trialed in this year. And I believe one of the questions is also referring to the data marketplace. And we can later on explain as to when and in what capacity the data marketplace was already launched and is going to be launched in the future.
Great. Yeah, and I probably sound like a broken record in the community when it comes to talking about the token, because I tell people all the time, don't look at it like a token. Look at the utility of it. So when you talk about who's going to be using token, you first have to figure out who actually needs to benefit from the utility and who's going to use the utility of it. And then once you understand the utility, then you understand the magic behind the token. So and that's really what it comes down to. So and on top of that too, now just having the integrations that you do have with BSI, well, now you have this exposure to these big companies who you might normally have not got this exposure for. So now maybe a Walmart of the world says, hey, you know what, this thing works pretty well. Maybe we should start dabbling into these other areas of this technology. So just having that exposure for those companies to the TRAC token and the way they're using it through BSI, I think is
a very
huge.
Good point. At the end of the day, and not to forget about it, it's open source, right? So OriginTrail is an open source protocol. It's also not relying only on the fact that we have to kind of do something. It's something we're looking forward to kind of having the community engaging and building out solutions that's going to make sense.
Yep, great.
Yeah.
All right.
Just wanted to jump in. That's really one of the last things. And then we're going to give the words to Ljubljana, Serbia and Germany. There was a job, I noticed that the community started talking about a 3-minute job today in the discussion.
Yeah, what the heck is that? Everybody's so confused. And like, what is, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's the complaints that when people complain to me, they're putting it on the ODN, I don't know.
So as Tomaž said, there are other companies that are going to be using the ODN because it's open source and it's inclusive, so any other technology company can start benefiting from the ODN. We checked who actually instigated the 3-minute job, and definitely wasn't us. So there must be someone else also building and trying the ODN, which is good, although it lasted only for 3 minutes, but hey.
I know, I'm trying to think of where the benefit is for 3 minutes. Now you really got me thinking. I'm going to be thinking about this for a week now. All right, let's jump to the next question while we're rolling along. Is there any live demos available for non-food tracking projects Trace Labs is doing, like NOS? So, and I know we spoke about this last time. So NOS isn't one thing, right? I know it's developed differently for each company, whether if your supply chain tracking needs are different than another company's, then your NOS is going to look different, right? But is there any sort of general demo that we might see come out of Trace Labs at some point, maybe like a YouTube video, like or a walkthrough just to show some of the features, what it can do?
Yeah, I think it was published. Short one. Yeah.
I'll let you guys be for a second.
No. If something was already out, that maybe we can reshare with you. That would kind of point to more things, but yeah, the short answer is, of course, yes. The point is to kind of have that be available for a lot of more visible, because it also is creating a good validation for the approach we're taking and how we're doing, how we're working on the cases. So let's park it until the end of the office hours, because I'm not sure what maybe there's already something.
I was actually expecting more questions in relation to in regards to the roadmap that we launched recently, and there is an item on the roadmap. I think it's called the crowdsourcing campaign.
Yep.
Check that.
It's knowledge campaign or
once we launch that campaign, and in the months going forward, we will definitely expose some of the proprietary solutions to the community so that they will be able to engage in this crowdsourcing campaign. We're not able to say which month that will be, but definitely somewhere in I believe Q3.
Well, yeah, there you go. So that's a.
Oh, okay, we'll hold you to that. Q3. You said definitely. So.
Yeah.
So it's a Q3. Where is it? Open Knowledge Repository Discovery Application. So there you go. Expanding on that that's going to be based off of the iOS. And Brana, I saw you unmuting yourself, so feel free to. You had your 20 minutes rest. You have to engage now.
You know how much I love to talk, and you're just talking all the time. You don't let me. No, just kidding. I wanted to jump in with a small sentence. So the idea there is that we actually look at the abilities of crowdsourcing data, in that sense that we can actually bring more knowledge to the ODN, grow its knowledge, and then show its value, both in the way of how easy it is to get its data together, so the connectivity aspect of it, as well as how useful it is for whoever this data is useful for. So that's kind of the idea behind it, and that's where we'll get to see more of an interactive demo of some features of the technology we've built out already, because that will be used for actually the way to ingest all this data.
Okay. While we're on it, I'm going to go a little out of order here. This is more of my question. So when we looked at the roadmap and we saw the TGS guesstimates, so to speak, for the different quarters, like what exactly makes the TGS the size it is, right? So I'm under the understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, if I upload an event, for example, it's now in the knowledge graph. If I were to upload a similar event or I'm a similar company, I'm not necessarily reduplicating that data. I'll use some of this data and maybe only upload a certain amount of data. So when people see a 2.5, versus a 5, they're thinking that just means double the jobs, but it doesn't, right? I mean, that means there's a lot of jobs, but there's just been some deduplicated data that was put up there in the ODN. Like, is that correct?
Yeah, so from the technical standpoint, imagine if you're trying to, maybe the best way to explain it is through kind of a sentence structure. So every graph actually kind of can be represented in terms of a natural language sentence. So you could say a subject predicate object relation. So I don't know, Branimir is holding his mouse or something like that. So you can literally take everything and sort of chop it up into these so-called triplets, subject, predicate, object. And if we simplify it enough just for this explanation, not to go for forever, essentially, the more of these triplets, the more information you give. If you were to have copies of these triplets, that means that you say the same sentence all over again. That doesn't mean more information, it's just more data. Mm-hmm. So that's where we make the distinction between data, which can be just random numbers or just duplicates, and information. And then the graph is a very good way to represent information, which is why the OriginTrail from the get-go is based on it. Finally, the idea is that once you have a graph of a lot of these things that are connected, you can kind of make questions towards it. You can literally ask something, and when I say you, that can be you as a person or someone as a company, or in the near future, that can be an algorithm. So that could be some sort of a machine trying to infer something from the existing information. The idea there, coming back to TGS, is that the network is more valuable if there's more information on it, not necessarily if there's more data on it. So that's how we're trying to quantify it. The TGS specifically takes into account both these objects and their relations. So when you look at a graph, you really have kind of two main groups of things. So you have something called edges and something called vertices or nodes, and basically edges connect vertices. So you want to count both of them. And in mathematical terms, the number of vertices would be something called the cardinality of the graph. So that's the order of the graph. And then you have a graph size, which would be the number of the connections, the edges, right? So because both of these contribute to the informational content, it makes sense to count them together. So the TGS is kind of a total graph size where actually it combines cardinality plus the graph size. And that means that if there's a new additional information coming in from the same source, and that's important to say, from the same source, so from the same network identity. So if I were to publish a same data set 3 times, the TGS would not change, or it would change very slightly just to say that I published it 3 times, because this is also some sort of information, right? But if we have 2 companies, let's say, publish the same event, literally the same data, this would increase the TGS. This would be because this doesn't necessarily mean that this is doubled information. This is actually 2 claims made by 2 companies,
right,
that happen to match, and that's actually a very useful property. But in order for us to be able to compare these, they have to be kept in such a way separate, and then you can actually do something to connect them via cryptographical mechanisms called the connectors, and that's also part of the ODN. But the question was around TGS and not around connectors. So when we come to that, I'll explain that.
All right. Well, thank you. It's kind of on board what I was thinking with, and I've been making sure I'm saying the right thing when I'm explaining it to others as well. So.
Maybe just a background also on TGS was really for us wanting to find the best possible metrics to describe the power of OriginTrail network. And as Branimir said, it's not only about data, it's about how these data points are connected, and how many different kind of data points you can get there. And it's really what is kind of the driving us towards the analogy that was used is the decentralized Google for supply chain. So when you would have these type of structures that Branimir was describing, like Branimir is holding a mouse, that I could ask the network, what is Branimir doing? And then the network understands, okay, Branimir, I have to look for Branimir is doing his verb. I have to figure out what is kind of like, what actions is he performing, and he'll find on the network, Branimir is holding a mouse. So I'll get that question answered from the network directly. And then this is how you're kind of starting to build out decentralized knowledge, where it's not all clamped down, it's decentralized, it's inclusive, but it's still functional in the similar way that Google would be for your random queries that you make on the internet.
Awesome. All right, thanks guys. Let's see, will traceability technology replace certifications, or will they complement each other? And it's funny because this last year I became a certified blockchain solutions architect, and you can actually verify the certification on the blockchain, which would make sense. And so are we going to start seeing more of these certifications? Like if you're a certified accountant, are you going to be able to verify that on the blockchain? Or, I mean, it seems like BSI is already doing that, right? So do we see all certifications going this way, do you think? Or do you think maybe it just complements it? Or I don't know.
In my first question would be is why not, right? So if you have a technology that can allow you that type of tamper-proofness in terms or integrity and validation of a particular claim that was issued, whether it be a certification or qualification or whatever, it's if you picture a future, it's ridiculous for us not to be able to have that ability to validate something in that type of fashion. And the question was also whether we see it kind of eliminating the certification bodies or kind of complementing them, is where I still see the complementarity very much be alive, because there's so much intangible knowledge, understanding of different peculiarities of each process, of how these standards came to be, of how the certification is made, that they'll have to redefine, but by enabling this trust enhancing technologies to augment their offering, right, to make it better. So if you look at how BSI even is thinking about these things in the white paper, it's like, it's really aligned with the vision of the world that we have in the future. It's like you're going to be able to validate these things, but at the same time, they're going to be molding the framework of how you're doing that and what type of data is relevant for you to kind of look at. So complementary and definitely the future. I don't see, like, I don't see the counter argument. Why wouldn't you go down that path?
Maybe just a 2 cents from my side on that one. Definitely, I agree absolutely with what Tomaž said in terms of being complementary, and I would take it even a step further and say the technology itself and the way things can then be done and linked to each other actually brings the, especially in supply chain context, for example, it brings down the increment that you're actually certifying, right? So imagine you're certifying a batch or a whole series, or certifying something for a full year, and once something is certified for a full year, nobody really checks what's going on in that year, right? So you have a certificate, it's valid for a year, that's where it is. So you certify a product for a year, and then it's certified for a year. And what the ODN and kind of the associated tech can actually bring to the table is to enable this ongoing continuous certification assurance, where you can actually then certify things on an ongoing basis. So imagine certifying every piece of product that is produced, every piece of meat, or every maybe smaller batch of meat that is produced, or every single piece of equipment for automotive industry, for aerospace, for whatever. So you really, I think the technology actually enables and drives this, and I think this is what we're also in our heads trying to move to. So to enable this reactive, so to switch more from a reactive type of certification, if that's the way to call it, to a more proactive and ongoing, on an ongoing type of basis.
So I heard aerospace and automotive in there. Let me write that down on my notes.
I mentioned those two things because those two things are kind of clearly very important, as it applies to passenger safety, same as the pharma, as you mentioned before. So yeah.
Oh, hold on, I gotta write that one down. All right. Actually, sticking with certifications, the next one kind of goes into it. So the BSI white paper mentions that they issue 200,000 certificates per year. I mean, is it planned that these are all now going on the ODN? Did they fully commit to saying, you know what, we're putting all this stuff on the ODN, all 200,000 certificates per year, they're going on there? Or is it all or nothing, or is there going to be some that are, some that aren't?
Yeah, so maybe I'll also jump into that one then. So we're definitely aiming at going towards that 200,000 or pretty much all of the certificates that are out there. But one thing to keep in mind is that those certificates, they're not the same certificates, right? So there are different certificates groups that are in there that might have different business requirements, different privacy requirements. So we need to tackle those groups as we go along and build slightly modified, say, or versions of the same solution for each group. And as we go along, definitely the target is all of them, and I think there's also that's also kind of the orientation for BSI, because there's no reason why you would only do part and the other part not. So definitely that's where that's what we're aiming at, but it's not something that you can just take and just say, okay, here are all 200,000, put them on, but rather it's more of a slice the elephant type of approach, because there are different requirements for different groups of certificates.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, that's good news. I mean, I think people were kind of seeing the writing on the wall with the BSI stuff, and I think the writing on the wall is their intention is to get everything over to the ODN because they see the benefit, and they know that why would you just have some when you can have all, and everything can benefit from it, not just small pieces of your business. So awesome. This one's probably more for Branimir. Will the requirements for the nodes change, and will they stay below 100,000 Infura calls? And I think what some people want to know, right, is adoption grows. What are the nodes going to look like? Are we going to be running a lot bigger nodes? Are there going to be so many calls that now we have to start running our own Ethereum nodes? Or like, are we going to allocate more memory and more storage? And when will that happen? Is it something that we see in the immediate future? Is it something down the road? So if you could speak to basically the node scaling, so to speak, of resources and calls.
Sure. That's it's kind of a wide question, so I'll try to approach it from a few angles. So there's a couple of goals we have that are sort of driving all these topics. So the hardware requirements and what you exactly do need to run a node. So The two main drivers are essentially high availability. So that means that, you have less of a chance of your node going down. Actually, quite a lot less chance if moving forward you apply more hardware. So essentially, it's kind of a conflicting argument to the other one, where you want less hardware to have a cheaper running node. So that's, but that's something where you can kind of tackle both angles. So, and actually, that's what we're working on at the moment. So within Q3 is where we plan to actually release a version of the node that has extended high availability capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it currently has some, but we're going forward with implementations that can go and spread around multiple servers, which then means that you might need multiple servers. But that, on the other hand, we're trying to couple with optimizing the actual functioning of the node so that it requires less power. So in that sense, we could technically see that you could have, let's say, I cannot promise, but let's say you have twice less of a hardware requirement, but then you maybe apply 2 nodes. So you get essentially a high availability in a sense of saving the same amount of cost. And that's kind of like an ideal we're striving for. How far we can get with it, it remains to be seen, because that's something we're testing. But there's also options there where not necessarily the hardware requirements right now are the minimum. So we're looking at how we can lower that in that sense. That's the actual topic around, how the nodes will evolve. So the idea is to lower the hardware requirement. You should be able to run a node with less, but then also be able to run a more powerful, highly available node, which is essentially kind of a sort of a cluster of nodes that work together. On the other topic around the blockchain calls, the number of calls towards Ethereum. So maybe not everyone on the call knows, but just to point that out, OriginTrail as a network is actually not a blockchain. So it's not a consensus-based network. It's actually a decentralized knowledge graph and a peer-to-peer network supporting it, which utilizes the underlying blockchain. So the consensus layer is, so to say, what was outsourced to the blockchain. And that's why it needs to be in sync with blockchain. But the number of calls, depending on the way the protocol is designed, doesn't need to rise with the usage of the actual network. Because, and I'll try to explain it simply, I hope I manage. Essentially, the node needs to be aware of all the transactions that happen on Ethereum. And because the Ethereum block time is the way, as much it is right now, it's synced to the Ethereum block time. So it makes a couple of requests every minute, sorry. So that's every 10 seconds is sort of a sync with Ethereum. So no matter what's going on with the network, it picks up all the events on Ethereum that happened within this time window. If it were needed to somehow, for some reason, sample faster, like let's say the block time of Ethereum goes down, that would mean that we would probably need to also sync faster, and that, but at the moment that's not needed. And in that regard, there's also optimizations that can be done there. But essentially, the node doesn't contact Ethereum more if there's more usage of the network. It just, remains in sync with what's going on within the blockchain realm that it needs to cover. So in that regard, we do not expect the number to change. There might be an error for some reason. We discovered a bug recently where actually we had community members highlight it to us, where the node would perform more queries than needed, actually quite a lot of queries within like 2 seconds, which is actually being released right now on the mainnet with a fix. So that's coming out immediately. So we might see things like that. We're not perfect. We make things, and then not everything turns out to be super polished from the start. But other than that, we do not expect that to change. In terms of running only Ethereum nodes, that's also, we do not expect that to happen in any time soon needed. But if it were needed, we're looking at ways of, because these Ethereum nodes also are developing quite a lot. Get has moved quite forward, parity as well. Within the high availability cluster, there might be a way of actually even including a node inside, which again brings us back to the to that discussion about hardware requirements. But there are things we're thinking about of, in case there's, you know, problematic sort of activity regarding Ethereum, that we can somehow also take that into account and keep the system running without any interruption. So that's kind of like the shortest I could.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Branimir. I'm going to go to the Q&As that are coming in the chat too. Might as well switch it up a little bit. Where do you see the biggest threat or competitor to the ODN and OriginTrail adoption? I mean, I tell people all the time, there is no competitor because everybody can use the ODN. But I mean, is there anything out there? I mean, Baseline's getting all the latest hype lately, but I haven't really seen anything come out of Baseline yet, or at least a usable type of format. So where do you see your biggest threat or competitor to the ODN and its adoption?
I think we should distinguish two things. There is a factual competition and there is none to OriginTrail, and there is a perceived competition, which is every project that is somehow active within enterprise space in blockchain. Why I'm making a division between the two? So the factual competition is non-existent because we're not building our own blockchain. That's number one. We have decided earlier in the project not to develop the blockchain, because in that case we would be competing against VeChain. We would be competing against perhaps even some of the builders of permissioned blockchain ecosystems. What we are building on top of blockchain technology is middleware that can interact as basically as a glue. And I know this word is quite overused in this ecosystem, between different blockchain ecosystems, as well as, and this is even more important in our view, existing legacy systems. And what we need to strive for as a community, and not only as OriginTrail community, but also other communities, blockchain communities, is to bring the legacy ecosystem on board with the use of decentralized solutions. And this is what we do as OriginTrail ecosystem, and to the same extent, what the perceived competition is doing is equally instrumental to the adoption of OriginTrail technology. What has happened in the past years, what we have seen with IBM doing in the space, what we have seen with some other companies doing in the space, Oracle, etc. Also public solutions, Baseline that you have pointed out. This is all very positive because they're all breaking the ice for the entirety of the industry. And the industry is very, very big, and it's severely underserved. You were asking us about the adoption, and OriginTrail has already been touching the biggest supply chains in the world. Now the question is, in what regard OriginTrail will be interacting with the existing supply chains? And this is something that can be expanded on. So it's not, sooner or later, we will not be expanding vertically anymore, horizontally anymore, so different supply chains, different big companies, but rather vertically. So how deep can we go into the existing legacy world? And this is where the standards will be instrumental. So the open data, open source data models like GS1 ePCS, like W3C consortium, like verifiable credentials. You were touching upon certificates. So verifiable credential standard is highly important for certifications. So it will be very much dependent on how much able we are to apply those standards. And this will be instrumental towards how deep can we go into the existing legacy infrastructure. And this is where the speciality of the OriginTrail technology lies. We're not talking about the transactions per minute like any other blockchains do. We're rather speaking about the cardinality. We're speaking about how sizable the knowledge the OriginTrail can describe is and will be in any time in the future. And this will decide how successful we are. This will decide how deep we went into the into the vertical of existing legacy systems. And Branimir used to, he made an analogy between the physical world and digital world, and how severely, how digital world is still lagging behind the physical world in terms of how well it is, describing the reality. So this is the job of the OriginTrail. So to catch up with the physical world and establish digital twins, which are going to be helpful when it comes to traceability, when it comes to authentication of different products, and several other use cases, not necessarily connected to the physical goods.
All right, awesome, great breakdown. Let's see. Moving forward through your roadmap, what are your most important next priorities? Does OriginTrail team have enough fundamental quote funds to achieve those milestones? Well, and again, I guess this goes to both sides, right? Because we really have Trace Labs, which is really a for-profit entity building on top of the open source protocol. But I guess basically, to summarize it, people are wondering about the runway. How's it looking?
Trace Labs, so the core builder of OriginTrail, has never been in a better shape when it comes to the capacity of to continue developing not only the open source components, but also the proprietary components built on top of OriginTrail. Of course, OriginTrail is instrumental to the success of the proprietary components, and also the most important marketing medium for Trace Labs. So there would be no business without OriginTrail. Not only thinking about the business of developing the OriginTrail, but actually gaining proprietary gigs. So in that regard, in the 7 years of doing the business within Trace Labs, we're actually at the height of our capacity. So what is the runway? Taking into consideration the validation levels and taking into consideration the number of businesses that we have acquired, we don't speak about the runway, because from that perspective, the project itself is already sustainable because of the validation.
Great, yeah, awesome. Let's go to the next one. Oh.
Maybe it's a good time to say we're also hiring.
Well, it's funny, you joke, but I mean, that's always a great sign, right? When people are like, well, how's the money looking? I'm like, well, it must be good because they're hiring people. Usually people, when they're not doing well, getting rid of people. So I would have to assume if you're hiring, you're in a good financial spot.
Yeah, I mean, we made sure that this whole situation around the pandemic also doesn't influence the running of the company as much. So it actually kind of pushed us to make the whole company even more resilient. So we haven't changed the team at all. Everyone's still with us, and we're expanding. So anyone maybe on the call interested in working on some cool tech with us, feel free to ping me directly on Twitter or anywhere.
Do you need a coffee guy? Like, I'm really good at getting coffee. I can get coffee like you wouldn't believe.
Can you make Italian coffee?
Yeah, I'll learn. All right. Are there any updates you can share with regards to the Oracle partnership? And for clarity, could you advise the purpose of the business relationship? We heard a lot about Oracle before. We haven't heard as much lately. I did notice a slideshow back in February that I found where they were actually presenting at that Oracle conference, and they had OriginTrail listed there. With like Chainlink and I think O-Chain or something along those lines. But so how is that relationship coming? Is there a lot more coming out of that we're going to see coming up? Is there a lot happening behind the scenes, or if you can even tell us anything?
Yeah. So it's not always about us. So pressing the red button should always be on the other side. Definitely, Oracle partnership is very much alive. As we already said, the infrastructure needs to be connected, and OriginTrail is instrumental when it comes to connecting data from different legacy systems, and also connecting basically the real world data with perhaps permissioned blockchain the Oracle is using. And in some cases, public blockchains are not they cannot be used for every specific use case. And one of the things, and I think we also mentioned that in the roadmap, we are going to show and have a live live run of the OriginTrail within the food supply chain, and this is going to demonstrate how OriginTrail can be used as an oracle, as a trusted oracle for permissioned blockchain. And so this is the roadmap part. Adjacent to that, there are some other activities which we will only talk about once the developments have reached certain maturity stage.
Once Oracle lets you. Gotcha. All right, let's see here. Any other use cases for the TRAC token mentioned? Also, any ETA in the data marketplace? Yeah, so we already kind of talked about the TRAC token and the adoption there, but is there an ETA for the data marketplace roughly? Is it Q3, Q4?
Yeah, I think the initial MVP was a great test to it. We've kind of learned a lot because it's quite a tricky piece to put together. Technically, it's quite complex, and I'm sure Branimir can go into the details also. It's just very difficult to ensure that the kind of the swap happens in the way that it should, that someone is not kind of messing with the system, that I'm not kind of giving you faulty data and receiving the funds, or vice versa. I'm kind of giving you the data, because once I give you the data, obviously you can see it, and then by that measure, it's kind of giving you the value. And how can I ensure that the value is received in a counter way without having a third party kind of looking into it? It's hard to do it in a trustless way. So that was it's quite a very complex chunk of work that was done to create that MVP. And we're really kind of excited to come to that point. So that's the technical complexities are definitely there. And then you have the whole other side, which is the business complexity of kind of having that type of finding the right setting to run those type of experiments. And it's been really great to see the kind of the initial validations already at the MVP stage, of seeing that people are kind of finding a good use for that. And we've done it within the kind of food data marketplace, of showing how certain data that's captured early in the supply chain could be resold to partners downstream, or potentially even creating some sort of new financing models for even financing the more data capture upstream. So if you're thinking like, how can we catch interesting stuff that's happening on the farm level by creating a data marketplace model that kind of financing that back. So like you have the technical complexity, you have the business complexities. In terms of where it's coming and how are we seeing the future of the data marketplace, there's a couple of interesting projects that are happening. One of them, the LDM, so the laboratory data marketplace, which is around sharing. So it's quite a peculiar thing. Labs that are doing tests for isotopic, finding particular isotopes that could create basically a fingerprint of a particular matter, of a particular product. So let's say that milk is coming from where we're sitting now in Slovenia. You would go and you would then analyze the earth or the soil, you would analyze the water, you would analyze the grass, and you would find certain isotopes that should then, at the end of the day, also come out in the product. But creating all of those different tests in the beginning is very, very expensive. So it's like 30 times more expensive than creating the test later down the line. So if you just want to have a comparative test. So what kind of this laboratory data marketplace could enable is that you would be able to have the sharing of the reference test be, and then you get compensated for those tests by someone across the world that wants to test something, right? And that's, again, here is kind of finding the business use case for that technical foundation we've created. Beyond that, there's also some that are still in the works that are, but it's a very interesting, like on the industrial level, it's a very, very interesting concept. And also we're kind of looking at how to use it on a couple of things that we're working on right now, which will hopefully have these office hours more often, and we'll be able to share this very
awesome.
soon.
I'm excited to see it. It looked pretty cool.
It's very, very cool stuff.
Well, the thing is, you could use it for anything, right? It doesn't have to be a food data market or lab. I mean, you could sell video game keys on it if you wanted to.
So there's been a lot of projects also on the kind of data marketplace topic already, but I think we have a very unique position because it's not it's not just data. It's like you can it is information in that sense. So once you have that knowledge graph, you can really play around with it. So it's also in terms of what you're selling, it's not just a stream of data, which is totally a different use case. It's more contextual data, which I know what I'm looking for, and if you have it, I'm much more willing to pay for it because I already know that that's like when we were talking about Branimir is holding a mouse. If I really want to know something about a mouse, and I'm like, who is holding it, and I'll be like, well, and I know that we're talking about the same thing, and I know who you are because we have our identities cross-confirmed. I'm much more likely to pay for that data than if you're just streaming, for I don't know, everything about the mouse. Like I don't care about all the mice.
Right, you can authenticate your source, and you know who you're dealing with, and you know what you're getting. So yeah.
And one more thing that is pretty cool about the LDM project is essentially, well, it comes out in this LDM project a bit more than in other cases that we discussed so far, is essentially then the ability to really use that data almost immediately in a broader supply chain context, right? So you have some traceability data, you want to establish some sort of a safety mechanism, for example, for your food, right? So you say, okay, I need a reference sample that I will purchase. It immediately can be used in the context of your other supply chain data. So where you can say, okay, now I'm going to take a sample of the specific batch of meat, and I'm going to compare it to the reference sample that we have. And then you get that say online to offline confirmation that meat is exactly what it says it is, or maybe it's not, and then you have a problem. But that's kind of the exciting part, I think, taking this into and putting it into a broader supply chain context.
Think of creating a database of matter, of like things that exist, and you can purchase things that you can validate that certain thing really is what it should. Like fast forward, we're having these tests available at home. And then bam, you'll just have like an immediate purchase of that data of the reference test of the, I don't know, New Zealand honey, and then you'll just immediately be able to check that even probably at home as things progress, right? So.
And while I'm on that topic, this is my own piece adding in. So how do the node operators come into play here? So am I temporarily just acting as that escrow between the two parties, and then once the exchange of data took place, then a job would finish, or is it just holding the data and that's it? It's the same way we are today.
So really, depending on the use case, this longevity of keeping the data is something that is kind of tied to the use of the data. So we cannot really know how long. I mean, 3 minutes is probably not long enough, the thing we saw today, but something that we might be seeing is anything from days to years, and depending on what context of the data that is. The way we're looking at the knowledge graph is important, though, because the knowledge graph, it's important to realize that not all data can be public, and in that sense, what is really replicated over the network is the public part of the data. That doesn't necessarily mean that only the public part of the data can be verified for integrity, because also the permission part, something that stays within a node of a certain data creator, is also can be verified, and that's part of the data marketplace feature. Because if I were to sell some piece of data to someone and it's already replicated on the network, everyone can access it. Why would anyone purchase it? So in a way, it's an enabler for this, as well as that the idea there being that think of it as all these companies or individuals running a node today or in the future on some sort of device have some interesting information to share with the world, and this information can be either monetized or traded or just shared publicly. But in order for you to be able to access this information, you need a network, and in terms of technical infrastructure, so you need to be able to move data around, and you need to be able to index it. So if you look at the public knowledge graph, which is kind of a spine of the whole OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph, it's more of an index. So if I were to look for the reference test for honey in New Zealand, I need to type in some search query, right? Just like is in Google. And what a Google does is really looks into an index, finds some sort of meaning to it, and looks into these other websites. So you type something into Google, you don't really see data from Google, you see data from other websites. And hence, in such a way, when you look at ODN, you're also looking at, okay, there's some public data, something which is not stored centrally like with Google, but stored within the whole network, which is really an index plus some public data that someone decided to share. It's a permissionless network, so you can post data that you see fit. But then again, you're also seeing responses from all the nodes, and some of these responses might be data that's not replicated over the network, yet it's present in the forms of proofs and metadata. So that's how you can even search for it. And that, in that sense, we might thinking of ODN is as the knowledge graph, especially the public data that is hosted by the anyone in the network, all the node holders, is more of like sort of a what is that in English? Yellow pages, right? Or some sort of an index.
Phone book.
Go and look something up, and then you can call that person via the network to get more information, purchase that information, maybe trade this information, because when you can purchase it, then you can also trade it for, let's say, the same amount of tokens or whatever. Tokens are really a way to quantify the value of this information. So in that sense, the nodes are necessary because you need a decentralized environment. We don't want to make another centralized place. Might
as well use Hyperledger at that point or something if you're going to make it centralized.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Something that's not controlled by one entity, and it can be distributed still, but this control is the problem, and that's where the ODN as the network is there to actually enable anyone to go ahead and query these things, to act as a resolver between someone asking a question and someone in the world giving the answer, potentially charging for it, which is why they would be motivated maybe to share that answer, like this laboratory data reference test, for example.
Thanks for going off more there on my question, because I kind of branched it into my own there too. So thanks. This one, I'm going to go back to the chat questions, and I'm pretty sure this is my boy Amos, famous Amos right here. So of course I'm going to have to ask it. Has there been much collaborative efforts between OriginTrail and various world governments as the technology has progressed? And I know you guys are doing a lot with all these government projects and funding. Like, how have those gone? Have you seen more governments tapping you, especially with this COVID-19 crisis? I would think that governments are getting more involved in making sure that they can use this type of technology to benefit them with a lot of stuff that's going on. So how is your governmental relations and beyond Slovenia, like around the world?
Yeah, so it's not unimportant to mention. I think we have not yet talked about the government project we are now doing in Slovenia when it comes to traceability of food. It's not unimportant because it's a great example of what can be done in food supply chains to increase fairness and visibility overall in food supply chains, and that's quite crucial right now in the COVID crisis. We were in contact also with the U.S. government. The talks there stopped at certain point because it's something that you cannot you actually cannot carry on working without having a certain presence within the U.S. And now we have a different situation because not only the technology has evolved, but also the partnerships have gained certain maturity. And again, as you are able to read within the BSI white paper, the one of the solutions is actually touching upon the public-private partnership within the Department of Homeland Security. So that's directly venturing into what the government, one of the governments around the world is actually attempting to do when it comes to decentralized solutions. And this is a space where OriginTrail is definitely getting exposure. In European Union, we have more than a handful of European projects. So Europe is more like a confederation of governments. and we have gotten approvals for several projects that are now being funded through the European budget. A majority of them within food security and food safety space. But there are some others, like the one that Tomaž mentioned, which are also going in deeper into technology, and the one that we have not yet announced, I believe, and it has to do with the satellite data, right?
Yeah,
I think we have not yet talked. So what I'm saying right now.
Oh, let me write that down. Hold on.
Yeah. So basically, there are a lot of things that have been discussed with governments. There are a lot of things that were already approved by the governments, or the ways that OriginTrail is getting exposed to the government, the different governments bodies across the globe. And definitely, I mean, we're pretty certain that we will see more of this in the future. Not only us directly, but most probably through the partnerships that we have established. Hope that answers your question, Amos.
Yeah. Actually, I'm looking at Telegram, and he's typing in all chats saying, "Baby, we've gone global." So. All right, let me go back to the other questions submitted in the forum. So, can the OT team please create a detailed, updated node setup guide for DigitalOcean, Hetzner, Contabo, VPS, so that multiple non-tech savvy community members can also participate in running nodes and create more decentralization and resilience of the ODN? Thanks. And it's something I tell people all the time about this too. And you might have your own answer for this, but it's one thing creating a guide, but then what do you do after you have the node set up? So being somebody in IT, I understand systems. I've built Linux systems for 20 years and have done networking. And it's one thing if you have a step-by-step easy guide to just build a node, but then what happens when it stops? Or what happens when, it's just something's not working because of a latest library that got downloaded or something? And that's why I caution people. They can make it very easy, but it also could really set you up to fail, where if one day your node goes down, you don't know how to get it up, and now you're going through litigation hell left and right. But I will ask this, I know it's a big one to community. Is there any plans to streamline the node setup process, or even maybe make some YouTube videos on a setup guide? I'm sure Branimir is ready to jump in on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. Like you said, it's a bit of it's not really a one-click installation, and it could be simplified further. And part of this also ties into what I also discussed about was the high availability developments. So in a way, it's going to enable additional sort of configurations of the node. So we're actually working on updating the documentation so that's fresh, and that you can see all the latest features of the node, also how to use it in terms of how you can utilize the knowledge graph, and as well how you can install and manage the node. There's several edits on the API that we've also done that make it a little less hard to use, and that's something where we can definitely move forward quite a lot, because it's a thing that once it's used, you kind of get feedback, and then you realize, oh, we could have made this a bit simpler, or you realize optimization points because you get this feedback. So yeah, in short, we're definitely going to have a more clear way of sort of instructions of how to set up a node, and that's coming relatively soon, because every sprint we go ahead and update a piece of the documentation. We haven't focused on it fully because there's tons of things we're working on, but at least it's not it's all being updated like in very sort of late fashion. We're pushing ourselves to be more sort of how would I say it? What was the right English word? Well, more frequent, let's say, with the updates, and that's going to come with the latest high availability features. So yeah, hopefully we get more nodes on the network as well once that is out.
Sweet. Because I imagine you need more nodes, right? The more nodes, the more data you can hold, the more people that can use the network. And
exactly, and also the great thing about it is that there's more people. You have more eyes on the network, and you never. I tend to say that these decentralized networks are really kind of a wild beast, because deployments and everything on different machines are so diverse that it's really hard to cover the whole spectrum. Different systems, and we're currently focusing on Linux, Ubuntu, but that's not always going to be the case. The idea is to make that wider as well. But while we're learning and fixing things, it's really great to get this feedback from the community, and that's where any sort of thing that's discovered is taken in by the team, and we're basically everyone running a node is helping the whole system grow, not just by having the node on the network, but also giving us all this information to feed back into the development. So I'll use this opportunity to thank everyone once again. And I know it can be painful from time to time to run a node, but thank you guys, everyone, for doing that, because you're helping us a lot.
Yeah, building on that, there's a point in the roadmap as well on the creation of the community page, which is intended for these purposes exactly. So we see a lot of very quality kind of content getting created, including videos like yours, Guinness, and similar. Just want to. The point of having the community page would be to have content like that, plus similar experiences of people that have been running nodes, have a place to kind of park, and also be available for anyone that kind of is looking for more guidance, so that it's, because it is like a communal effort at the end of the day, and it makes sense for that to exist. So yeah, that's why we also added that to the roadmap.
Awesome. I know people are super pumped for that roadmap coming up. So okay, I'm going back to one of the chat questions, which is, has the team ever heard of Four-Ledger? It seems they possess similar lingo to the OriginTrail. Is that a solution being built on the ODN?
I have to admit, I've never.
Yeah.
I haven't come across, no. I mean, we as a general rule, really like to look at projects that kind of has to come from tangible space, so that we can really see how something has been utilized in action. So that's kind of, and if that's kind of usually the threshold, and then we kind of actively deep dive, because that's a lesson that we learned also from, let's say, the early days, where there was just a lot of different projects kind of picking up lingo left and right, trying to create a narrative that would stick. And it kind of you have to start to focus. And I'm not putting that project in that bracket, automatically.
Right. Yeah. No, I get you.
That's how we kind of approach it. And well, I'll definitely check them out. And if they fall in the bracket, we'll definitely kind of keep an eye out on what's, because like all open communities, we look at what's being done, seeing the ideas similar to how people do within OriginTrail, which is the intention. Like you have to, that's the point of the whole industry to advance, is if we keep learning from each other's work and mistakes and good stuff.
All right, cool. I'm going to another community question, just because some of these coming in are pretty good, but this one I especially like because it's in my own head too, is could the ODN track and solve the problem of election voting and COVID-19 testing, being the trusted intermediary? I mean, we know how the election stuff's been going in the news lately and in the past, and it seems like that's a good kind of platform. You can't really fake a vote, right? Or even the COVID-19 testing. We saw our major failures in the supply chain show up. It really, and it's kind of a blessing in disguise for you guys, because it really exposed a lot of weaknesses in the supply chain. So I think people are seeing now more than ever a need for this type of technology. So between voting or COVID-19 testing, have you guys been tapped? Somebody, has your phone rang, or your email box been blowing up, or
yeah,
what can you say?
We got requests even from the surrounding governments. We are not active in the proximity tracing space, mainly for one reason, at least not at this point, namely the privacy. The privacy and the GDPR and the rest of the regulation. I hear that the US is also is going to get an even stricter regulation to that of the GDPR. So tapping into the proximity tracing, so into spaces that have certain privacy concerns, is legally quite difficult. So it is a challenge to us, but at this point we try to solve technological challenges and not trying to overburden ourselves with the legal challenges. So that's the personal and privacy space of the COVID problem. When it comes to supply chain problems caused by the COVID, we have been looking into at least one of the examples where OriginTrail can help mitigate certain issues. And again, it is connected with certifications for the personal protective equipment, for example. Mostly governments are relying on the certificates which they receive from suppliers prior to giving them cash and wiring the money for those products to be shipped into the countries. And personal protective equipment plus the ventilators and other equipment needed to treat COVID-19 patients is oftentimes being, or it has been oftentimes falsified. And in some cases, the equipment was not even delivered. And everything that the governments and the hospitals received prior to purchasing that equipment was a simple certificate, which in many cases there's even an example here in Slovenia from one of the BSI's competitors. We can
it's public, no?
It's public. Bureau Veritas actually they twice confirmed that a specific certificate is true, although it was not. And when they did so, actually the distributor ordered specific, I think it was something about the masks or even the ventilators, which then ended up being ordered, and that equipment was actually it was not useful because it did not have all the right certification you need in order to treat patients, in order to protect doctors. So again, venturing into certification is something that is definitely helping alleviate the pains caused by the COVID-19. But again, this is where we do things together with partners, because when you try to solve the problem of fake certificates or even the fake medical equipment, you would need to have a wider collaboration. And certificates, again, they require at least 3 different entities. You need a holder of a certificate, then you need an issuer, which is a certification body, and a verifier, which is typically government or someone purchasing that equipment. And all those parties need to be somehow onboarded into using the technology. And this is something that we do have not only in plans, but actually we are kicking and trying to deliver something as soon as possible. By saying something, I mean at least something that can be shown and being put into use before the second wave of the COVID hits us. And some say, or even the majority of experts say that this was only the first wave of the COVID, and this is also the reason why we try to be hopeful, or even try to deliver something useful.
Speaking of COVID,
Thank you for bringing that up. It's a very important issue for us, and we believe that OriginTrail has a very important role to play here.
Awesome. So
generally, when there's resilience to supply chain, the fit is good.
Yeah. Stream Mom's telling me we got to wrap it up soon, so I'm guessing 7 more minutes. So I'm going to do 2 quick ones. When Binance? That's really one of the questions in there. So, but I'm going to get to the exchanges. People will kill me if I don't. What's the story in exchanges? Are you pursuing? Are some looking tempting, or some of them you're just there's no way because they're ridiculous? So where do we stand with that?
We're sticking to the approach of which seemed sensible in the past, and it still does, and it's obviously being able to obtain and being able to move trace is something that's a beneficial thing for the ecosystem as a whole. But it's really important to do it kind of in the right way, and we are actively involved in a lot of kind of activities around that topic, but it's always a process, so things take time. And it has to be a good fit from both sides. So sometimes, one party, sometimes the other party feels that something is not kind of feeling right. Then that makes kind of a flag comes up, because at the end of the day, it's also something that it's kind of it has to be somewhat of a two-way partnership, so that this kind of starts to make sense. at very little, like minimum. Obviously, exchanges can list assets if they see fit on their own as well, and that's okay and that's fine. Yeah, for those that we engage with, we wouldn't feel comfortable, and especially from the ecosystem's perspective, it's like you don't want to invest time and effort and resources into something that you don't feel that is kind of like a good thing. But if it is, and we feel that it's beneficial, then of course we follow that path. That being said, again, the exchanges and the can decide to do on their own as well, since ERC20 token traces ERC20 tokens, so it's B2B traded.
Uniswap, Kyber, you can do any of those too. So.
Oh yeah, so then there's those projects, and we've named that as well as one of the things that we want to kind of engage with, even by the end of this month, is to see how we can how to really utilize these technologies which make sense, and they're kind of decentralized, and they are kind of made for ERC20 assets to provide that liquidity and to provide that way of exchanging between each other, which kind of like from a conceptual point of view looks really good. So that's why we're also kind of pursuing that path. It's not just the centralized kind of exchanges that we see that will have place in the future, but also the decentralized exchanges. And it's a tricky topic as well, and I'll end up on that because it changes very frequently. And yeah, every 6 months you have some new players coming in the space, so you kind of want to feel good on who you're creating this relationship, because it might change in the future.
Right.
That's why I'm jumping in for a second, just for Uniswap. It's really been an idea of ours for a while, because we're big fans of decentralization and projects in the decentralized space in any way. So we're really excited that it's coming out, not only because it's kind of a decentralized alternative, but also because the latest version of Uniswap v2 actually introduces some really cool features, like the flash swap, for example, which we're exploring in terms of how we could potentially leverage such things, so that we can make things a bit easier on the front of working with the OVN as well. So specifically from the perspective of NOS, because in that case it's a different type of integration when you're working with a centralized API rather than something that's already within Ethereum in its fullest. So you can, and when you have the ability to do more than just regular transactions, as it was up until these were other features were possible, you kind of start thinking a bit wider, and there's potential things we can improve there as well. Not just having it more decentralized, but having it more easier.
Right. All right. So we're gonna wrap this up because we got 2 minutes left, and we're probably gonna get the boot. So thanks you guys for everything. I'm sure you might want to close out, Žiga, Tomaž, or.
Yeah, we just want to thank you again, Guinness, and we really look forward to have this next month again. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that instead of issuing monthly reports, we're going to be having these conversations on a monthly basis. This is an upgrade to the ways we have communicated in the past, and we hope to even have some extra people in this discussion. So if anyone from the community would like to join, you don't need to show your face. Just speak to us. Try to interrupt us if we're being unclear. And this is all towards the end of having this community, having this communication clearer, more richer in terms of information, and at the end of the day, it's also important to have fun. So myself personally, and I believe also my partners here, had a lot of fun talking with you guys today, and we look forward to talk again in the future, in a month's time.
Me too. Can't wait. Love it. All right, guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Good luck.